A perpetual state of almost. They'd appear for a few days, a flurry of messages, warmth, the feeling that this time something real was forming. And then they'd pull back, not gone, not present, somewhere in the threshold, a like on your photo 3 days after going quiet, a voice message at midnight that didn't say anything specific, a memory they happened to think of on a random Tuesday. You kept recalibrating. You kept asking yourself, is this moving somewhere, or is this just what they do? That pattern has a name, the technique has mechanics, and the person on the other end of it, whether they know it consciously or not, is running a system that keeps you attached at minimum investment while they keep their options open on every front. This is breadcrumbing, and the reason it's so hard to escape is that it's designed to exploit the part of your psychology that is most human, the drive to resolve ambiguity, to finish the story, to stay long enough to find out if it was real. It wasn't, but your nervous system didn't know that yet, and they were counting on it. The term comes from Hansel and Gretel, the trail of crumbs left through the forest to find your way home. In the original story, the birds ate the crumbs and the children got lost. Breadcrumbing is the practice of giving just enough attention, affection, or contact to maintain your emotional investment without ever committing to a real relationship. The breadcrumber never says yes. They never say no. They exist in a permanent state of almost close enough to feel real, ambiguous enough to never be accountable. It shows up in early dating. The person who texts you every few days, calls you babe, makes plans they never follow through on, sends a photo of something that reminded them of you, then vanishes for a week. It shows up in long-term situationships, the person who's been figuring out what they want for 9 months. It shows up after relationships end, the ex who surfaces every few weeks with a message that doesn't ask for anything, but doesn't let you go either. The defining feature of breadcrumbing is not the frequency of contact, it's the absence of progression. Real connection moves somewhere. Even slowly, even imperfectly, there's a direction. Toward more clarity, more depth, more presence, more commitment. Breadcrumbing has no direction. It's deliberately static. The crumbs are calibrated to keep you in place, curious enough to stay, uncertain enough never to demand more. That calibration is the tell. When someone can maintain your interest indefinitely without ever advancing the relationship, that's not confusion. That's a skill, a practiced one. And here's what makes breadcrumbing more psychologically sophisticated than outright deception. It requires your participation. The breadcrumber doesn't force you to stay invested. They create just enough uncertainty that your own mind does the work. You fill in the gaps. You write the version of them you want to be real. You return to the evidence, the warmth of that Tuesday message, the specificity of that midnight call, and you read it as hope. Hope is their primary tool. They didn't give you a relationship. They gave you enough to sustain hope, and hope, in the absence of clarity, can keep a person waiting indefinitely. To understand why breadcrumbing works, you have to understand variable reward schedules. In the 1950s, behavioral psychologist B.F. Skinner discovered that the most powerful way to sustain a behavior wasn't to reward it every time it occurred. It was to reward it unpredictably. A slot machine that pays out on a random schedule is far more compelling than one that pays out every pull. The unpredictability is the hook. Your brain can't figure out the pattern, so it stays engaged indefinitely, waiting for the next payout. A breadcrumber runs a human version of this system. You never know when the next crumb is coming. You never know what behavior will produce warmth. You never know if the affectionate message tonight means something or nothing. The unpredictability keeps your attention fully allocated. You check your phone. You replay the last conversation. You wonder if you said something to push them away, or if they're just busy, or if this is the week it finally becomes something. That wondering is the point. An engaged mind is a captive mind. As long as you're analyzing, you're not leaving. There's also a neurological cost to this kind of sustained uncertainty. Prolonged ambiguity in an attachment context triggers a chronic low-grade stress response. Your cortisol stays slightly elevated. Your nervous system never fully settles. You exist in a state of low-level hypervigilance, attuned to their behavior, alert to any signal, ready to recalibrate at the first sign of either warmth or withdrawal. This is exhausting in a way that's hard to name to anyone who hasn't experienced it. You're not in crisis. You're not visibly devastated. You're just perpetually unsettled. You describe it as complicated. You tell your friends you're still figuring it out. You've been figuring it out for 8 months. Now add to this the sunk cost trap. The longer you've waited for clarity, the harder it becomes to walk away without it. Walking away without resolution feels like losing, like all that waiting was for nothing. So you extend the timeline. One more crumb, one more conversation, one more chance for them to decide. The breadcrumber knows, consciously or not, that time is their greatest asset. The longer you stay in the almost, the more invested you become in the outcome. The more invested you are, the less likely you are to force a resolution by leaving. And here is the darkest part of the mechanics. Breadcrumbing is self-sustaining. You don't need the breadcrumber to actively do anything. Once the pattern is established, your own psychology does the maintenance. You rationalize the gaps. You reinterpret the ambiguity. You stay. Breadcrumbing isn't always a calculated predatory strategy. It exists on a spectrum, and understanding where on that spectrum you're dealing with is important. Not to excuse the behavior, but to see it clearly. At one end, people with avoidant attachment styles. They genuinely want connection but become flooded by intimacy and instinctively create distance when closeness increases. They're not running a manipulation scheme. They're managing their own anxiety about vulnerability. The breadcrumbs are real in the moment. The warmth is sincere. The disappearance is automatic. The result, for you, is the same: indefinite ambiguity with no commitment. The difference is intent. But when someone's psychological pattern inflicts chronic uncertainty on you, intent becomes less relevant than pattern. In the middle, opportunists, people who like having options, who enjoy the feeling of being wanted without the responsibility of wanting back. They're not actively planning to hurt you, they're just keeping you available in case the other options don't work out. You're in their roster. Your slot is warm backup. They maintain the slot with minimum investment. The crumbs aren't affection, they're slot maintenance. At the other end, calculated breadcrumbers, people who understand exactly what they're doing and why, who use ambiguity as a control mechanism, who derive something specific from your continued investment in them: validation, attention, a guaranteed emotional fallback, a sense of power. For this type, your hope is the product. Your waiting is what they want. The resolution is never coming because resolution isn't useful to them. You being almost there is. The tell that distinguishes these categories is what happens when you ask for clarity directly. An avoidant person usually experiences significant discomfort, gets overwhelmed, pulls back harder, but eventually, in a direct conversation, will acknowledge what they can and can't offer. An opportunist usually deflects, reframes, and ultimately reveals their actual priorities through their actions rather than their words. A calculated breadcrumber will turn your request for clarity into evidence of your neediness. They'll make you feel like the problem for wanting to know where you stand. They'll say things like, "Why do we need to label it?" and "I just feel pressure when you do this," and "Things were good before you started pushing." The request for clarity becomes the thing that almost ruins it. You end up apologizing for asking. If asking for clarity made you feel like the unreasonable one, that's information. That's not confusion. That's a deliberate maneuver.